What's up, guys? Gonna try to get this done quick, not belabor it. 2-2 last night, so a slight loss. Seton Hall win. Atlanta Hawks win, although they actually blew a giant lead in the second half and then still turned it around and wound up winning and covering. So that was good. Marquette was just out of the game. The other two games, the games that were losers, Marquette and Davidson. Davidson started off all right, and then both those games came down to a huge 3-point discrepancy. It really is why those games were lost. I mean, you could say they were bad plays, maybe, but the 3-point discrepancy, and that's the more unpredictable stat in college basketball to quite an extent. So what can you really do there? Marquette actually got to within the number, even though they were getting kind of destroyed in the game. They got back to within 5 in the final minute or so. And then, of course, it came down to intentional free throws. So, they're going to lose by 7, and they're not going to cover the 5.5. So that's great. We move on to today. Oh, man, I can't even breathe right now. I've been running around all morning. All right, college basketball. I'm really going to try to keep this brief because I'm being very selective here. College basketball, mostly conference tournaments are in play. I mean, it's half conference tournaments, half regular season at this point. I'm not that interested in these conference tournament games yet. I mean, the ones that happened yesterday kind of went as planned. You do have in the Atlantic Sun, I think those teams are playing today, right? Stetson and, are they not playing? I thought they were. Yeah, they are. Stetson's playing Jacksonville and Austin Peay playing North Alabama, which I believe those are the semifinals now. You could say that Jacksonville and North Alabama, because they both pulled off upsets against Eastern Kentucky and Lipscomb, who are really the top two teams in that conference. Big road upsets for both of those teams. Does that mean they're going to be in a letdown spot here? I don't think the letdown really applies when it's a tournament. Like, obviously, you're still going to be focused. You're going to try to win. You have motivation when you're trying to win the tournament. So every team involved does have motivation. So then it kind of comes down to which team is the better team, really, in a lot of cases. Or do you think that team that pulled off that upset is going to run out of steam or something like that? So I would consider maybe playing on Stetson. I would not want to play on Austin Peay just because I don't think they're a very good team. Stetson, on the other hand, I mean, although North Alabama had a pretty dramatic win, even more dramatic, the way that North Alabama won, I think they won on a ridiculous, weird running jumper buzzer beater. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what their emotional state is going to be off of that game. Will they suffer any sort of letdown or hangover? I guess you could say maybe it's possible, but I don't trust Austin Peay either. The Stetson Jacksonville one, I mean, the thing about that is I might consider playing Stetson if they had a bad game in the previous game and escaped with a scare. So the way that the tournaments will work, I think the best situation that you can find is when you have one team that pulled off a giant upset. So they're you're playing against them because you think that they basically ran out of gas and kind of just used up everything they had in that game, versus a team that's a good team that had a scare in the previous game. So that's kind of what you want to look for there. And you want to play that good team that had a scare because they're really going to refocus. And the other team might be running out of steam at the same time. I don't really see that with the Stetson situation. I think they won their game rather easily against Queens. So I'm just not going to get involved in that tournament. I do kind of lean in the horizon. I do kind of like the spot for Milwaukee, but there's one thing that keeps me off of that. That's Milwaukee against Green Bay. That's in the tournament. So the thing about that I like is that Milwaukee has already played one game in the tournament. They were a huge favorite against Detroit Mercy, who I believe only had one win on the entire season. And Detroit Mercy was beating Milwaukee for half of that game. Milwaukee was losing the game for the entire first half. And they came back and won, but that was kind of a scare. They almost lost as big favorites to one of the worst teams in college basketball. That's probably going to refocus Milwaukee here. And on top of that, Green Bay has not played yet in this tournament. So Green Bay has had extra days off, and I don't think that's a good thing, even though you might say, well, they're going to be rested. I think that they're going to potentially come in cold, and you have to kind of get over the hump and get over that nervousness, whereas Milwaukee already did that in their previous game. They already had that bad start, and they were able to overcome it, get it out of the way. They kind of struggled against a really bad team. So I think that's going to refocus Milwaukee. So I like the Milwaukee side. That is the only way I would lean in that Horizon matchup there, except for the fact that the problem with it is that Green Bay, in their last game of the regular season, which is the last game that they played, they lost at Milwaukee horrendously by 21 points. So that is what kind of keeps me off it a little bit, because I think that might cause Milwaukee to, I don't know. They might get a little bit complacent just because they know they blew this team out badly, and that might still motivate Green Bay. Like, they're going to have adjustments to make, whereas if you're Milwaukee and you just crush this team, you don't really have the adjustments to make. So that's kind of unfortunate because it almost kind of sets up like a zigzag angle on the Green Bay side. If that wasn't the case, I might be jumping in on Milwaukee here because they already got that first game under their belt, had a scare against a pretty bad team, and that puts them in like a positive situation. Whereas Green Bay coming into this game cold, I think is mostly a negative, other than what I just said. Won't be laboring anymore. The one play I'm going to be on, this is a very, very bizarre situation. Like, this is something you don't really see like ever or almost ever. I'm going to be going against UC San Diego, taking UC Davis plus the points. I think this is down from like an opener of 7 to somewhere in the 6.5 range, although KenPom kind of has this line a little bit higher than that, which I don't love. And San Diego, I think, plays a slower pace. Neither of these teams are very fast paced, though, but it's going to be at San Diego's house. But I think the fact that they play a pretty slow pace, it's not really what you want when they're laying a bunch of points. And UC Davis doesn't really play that much of a faster pace, so it's not really going to be totally going in opposition to their style of game. But what I like about this is a bizarre situation where UC San Diego's in the transition period. So they're transitioning into Division I, which means they're ineligible for the postseason, which usually means that you're just ineligible for the NCAA tournament. Like we saw that with like Merrimack last year, and I think Bellarmine the year before that. Those teams were in transitions. They were ineligible for the NCAA tournament, but they were able to play in their conference tournaments. And that set up nice situations, weird situations where you could actually play on Merrimack last year in their conference final and Bellarmine in their conference final the year before that. I think Merrimack might have missed the cover by like a half point last year, which was unfortunate for me. Bellarmine covered in theirs. The situation in those games was that team that was ineligible for the NCAA tournament, they're playing in that conference final. That's like their final game. So that's all they have left to play for, winning the conference. That turns into like a big game for them, whereas their opponent last year was Fairleigh Dickinson, and then the Bellarmine one was I don't even remember who they were playing against. Was it Liberty? I don't even remember who they were up against that was back when Liberty, I think, might have been in the ACE. I don't even know who it was. It was somebody I think it was the ASUN, whatever conference it was. That set up situations for both of those teams, for Fairleigh Dickinson and whoever Bellarmine's opponent was in that game, where those teams, once they got into the conference finals, that meant that they were already in the NCAA tournament. So they didn't have to win their conference final because their opponent in the conference final was ineligible. So that sets up a situation where that team that's already in the NCAA tournament, that's like the conference championship, I mean, it kind of matters in like name, like, yeah, we won the conference tournament, but they're at that point kind of more focused on we're in the NCAA tournament. So that sets up a weird situation. And this situation is different from that too. This is a situation where UC San Diego is in the transition period, but they are ineligible. It looks like they're ineligible for the postseason, and that includes the Big West tournament. So I think these conferences have different rules, so they can't play in the Big West tournament. So, and I think they're also effectively locked into the 2 seed because I don't know if they can jump UC Irvine anyway in the Big East standings at this point, but it also doesn't matter because, well, yeah, I guess UC San Diego has 2 games left, and I don't know how many does Irvine have left. Oh, I guess, yeah, they could actually technically because both teams have 2 games left. So, yeah. So, I guess in theory, UC San Diego could actually wind up with a better record than UC Irvine, or wind up tied with. I don't even know which one of those teams would have the tiebreaker because they went 1-1 against each other, I believe. But UC San Diego, they can't even get into the tournament. So, seeding doesn't even matter for them at this point. So, like, what is going to motivate them in this game here against UC Davis, even though, yeah, UC Davis is one of the better teams in the conference. UC Davis is 2 games behind them. So UC San Diego, by losing this game, they won't fall out of the 2 spot. But having the 2 spot doesn't even matter because they can't even play in the Big West tournament, and this is not their final home game. So this is a home game, but they have another home game up next. And, yeah, it's against a bad team in Cal Poly, but that is their senior night. Even though, yes, it is against one of the worst teams in college basketball and the worst team in this conference. And I don't even think it's close, like by far the worst team, but that's still going to be, that is their senior night. So will they treat this game like senior night because it's a better opponent? I might say yes, except for the fact that UC San Diego went into UC Davis's place earlier this season and beat them 92-59. That's just completely ridiculous. And that's even an outlier high score for UC San Diego because they actually play a slower game. They don't tend to score in the 90s like that. I mean, I think they only have a couple games where they scored in the 90s all year, and like they're probably against like Division II schools, and then they the one that went into overtime against UC Irvine. So that's just a ridiculous outlier result, and I think that's probably going to motivate UC Davis here. Like, I don't know where the motivation is going to come from for San Diego here. They're coming off another nice win by 10 over Northridge on the road, bouncing back from an ugly loss to Bakersfield. I played Bakersfield in that game because San Diego was off of UC San Diego, I should say, not to confuse them with University of San Diego and the WCC. UC San Diego was coming off that big win over Irvine. So that was a bad spot, kind of a letdown / sandwich spot. And they got definitely tripped up in the Bakersfield game, bounced back, won their second road game. Now they're coming back home. And like I said, this is not their final home game. They're playing a UC Davis team they already smoked on the road. And if you look at the stats in that game, I mean, the statistical outliers in that game were that UC San Diego shot 47% from three, UC Davis shot 20%, and UC Davis had 14 turnovers to San Diego 7. You might say, well, the turnover discrepancy might look like that again because usually the home team wins the turnover battle. I mean, yeah, that's true. And UC San Diego did dominate them on the boards, but shooting-wise, it was like UC San Diego did have way more possessions because of the turnovers, but they were 15 for 32 from three. They had 11 more three-pointers than UC Davis did. So that's a 33-point differential just from the three-point line. That is a total outlier. That's not going to happen in most games. Beating a team by 33 just from beyond the arc, that's insane. And they had 13 more field goals overall, but like I said, 11 of them were from three-point range. And UC Davis actually had more free throw attempts slightly, which is whatever. I mean, that may be expected at home, but I think the three-point shooting in that game was enough of an outlier that I highly doubt that this game is going to look that way, that it's going to be that much of a blowout. You see, San Diego does not play high-scoring games to that extent, hardly ever. They tend to try to slow the pace down, so I think that UC Davis is going to be the more motivated team to come within this spread here. I mean, look at UC Davis. They know that they got absolutely embarrassed on their own floor by UC San Diego. So they're going to want to show up in this game. And they're, of course, they are eligible for the postseason. And they're kind of in the driver's seat to get the 2 seed in the Big West. But with most teams having 2 games left, that's not guaranteed. Like Long Beach State could definitely steal the 2 seed away from them. So I think UC Davis could wind up anywhere between the 2 and the 4, I think, at this point in this conference. I'm not even sure. Or maybe the 2 and the 3, but they don't want that to happen, man. I mean, they want to hold on to the 2 seed if they can. So UC Davis is playing for that. They are still playing for seeding coming into this tournament. They're coming off a game that was kind of a bounce back because they also beat Northridge on the road, then lost at Bakersfield on the road pretty badly, and then they had a nice bounce back at home. They beat Hawaii, decent win. That was their final home game. That was their senior night. So are they going to suffer a letdown here? I don't think so, because they're going into UC San Diego, who's in second in the conference and is a team that just absolutely totally laid the smackdown on them on their own floor. So I expect focus for UC Davis here. They're the team that has something to play for here. UC San Diego, their motivation is definitely in question here. It's just such a weird spot because of their ineligibility and it not being their final home game. Their senior night is going to be 2 games from now. But yeah, I would like it a little bit better if that was against a better team, which it's against the worst team in the conference and one of the worst in college basketball. But even so, I think it's a weird motivational spot. And you do see this line moving down towards UC Davis. I think the market is kind of indicating on UC Davis at this point, and that's going to be my only play on the entire college basketball slate today, which is crazy. I just don't have reads on a lot of these conference tournament games. At this point in the earlier conferences, the smaller conferences, it's kind of tough. It's kind of a minefield. Not doing it. I'm also completely skipping the NHL card, even though it's a big NHL card. A lot of these teams are just in bad spots, like going up against teams that I think are also not really in good spots. Like you got Vegas. They just got embarrassed in their last game against the Blue Jackets. You might think they might bounce back and turn it around, but they're returning home from kind of a long road trip. So they're not in a good spot just because they're returning home from a road trip, but they might be focused anyway because they're facing Vancouver. So that's just kind of a hard read there. But yeah, and then Vancouver, they're not really in a great spot either, coming off a pretty good win over the Kings. So that's a tough one to read, man. I mean, I would not want to play on Vegas on that huge road trip return spot there, but I don't want to do it when I don't want to play against them when it's against a really good opponent like Vancouver, where you're probably going to draw focus anyway. You got Toronto in a road revenge spot here against Boston because they just lost at home to my Bruins a couple games ago. But Toronto also played overtime last night and beat Buffalo. So they're in a back-to-back in 2 straight road games with no time off. Or no, excuse me, they played at home last night. So 2 games in different cities, though. So it's road revenge, but they also have no rest. So that's kind of a weird spot there. So I don't want to get involved in that one either. So, yeah, just skipping the board completely in hockey. And then we'll go to the NBA. There's one spot in the NBA. And in the NBA last night, yeah, I mean, you had the Atlanta Hawks. I mean, that was a fine play last night. I mean, I think they were the right side. Even though they kind of blew it in the second half, they were able to turn it back around. But they had the lead for most of it. They were the better team in that game. But I should have played Golden State. And Golden State actually got more benefit in the line because Giannis did come back in that game from Milwaukee. And once that was announced that he was definitely playing, the line actually dropped from Golden State being a 4-point favorite to like a 2.5-point favorite. So you got some real value on Golden State. And it became that set up like the reverse injured player theory spots. You had Milwaukee coming off a big win anyway, I think, over the Clippers. You had Golden State coming in off a real embarrassing loss to the Celtics. That was a good spot for Golden State. I should have played it. And then the reverse injured player theory with Giannis coming back kind of put it over the top, and Golden State won that game easily. Bad game for Milwaukee. So should have played Golden State last night. It's unfortunate. I mentioned that as a lean. So hopefully, yeah, if people got involved in it, hopefully they did and they won on that one. I mean, it does set up kind of a bad spot for Golden State tonight because they're coming off a blowout win last night. So now they're on a back-to-back, although they're not traveling because both games are at home. But I don't quite love jumping in on the Chicago Bulls in that one just because the Bulls are also coming off a nice, huge comeback win a couple nights ago, which is the game I was on against Sacramento. So Chicago's, I don't think they're in the best spot either, even though, of course, they're going to be focused when they're playing the Golden State Warriors. So I don't think there's that much to take away from this Chicago Golden State game, but I do lean against Golden State because that was a big blowout win last night against Milwaukee, and they have no time off. So, yeah, Golden State not in a good spot, but who's in the worst spot on the entire NBA board, which is why I'm going to play this game, even though it's going against my, where I say I don't like to get involved in games with double-digit spreads. This one is a double-digit spread now. It opened below the double digits, but I'm going to grab the double-digit points with the Toronto Raptors here. This spot for Phoenix, I just think it couldn't be much worse than this, really. It could be worse if they were returning from a long road trip, but they are returning home from the road. They just played a TNT game. I think it was TNT because I had it on TV. It was some TV game against Denver. They went into Denver, home of the returning champs. Denver was also the team that eliminated Phoenix from the playoffs last year, I believe, in the was that in the conference? No, it was in the conference semifinals, I guess. So Denver was the team that eliminated them. I don't think Phoenix had beaten Denver yet on the season. Yeah, they had lost at home to Denver the one other time they played them. They went into Denver's house, had a huge lead in that game. Were blowing Denver out, and then Denver came all the way back, made a huge comeback late, took the lead, and it looked like, oh my God, Phoenix just completely imploded. And Phoenix really does not have that deep of a roster, really, so it looked like it was over at that point. Phoenix had just totally imploded and blown it. It wound up going into overtime, and Phoenix played a great overtime period and still won by 10 at Denver. That is a monster win. They got to be in a letdown spot now, even though the only time they played Toronto this year otherwise was up in Toronto, and Toronto actually beat them. And that was a game where they had Denver coming up after the Toronto game. So that was a little bit of a look ahead there, too. And they were coming off a win over the Knicks, which was a decent win. So, but still, I don't think the fact that Phoenix lost at Toronto is going to cause them to focus on Toronto here. Toronto's a bad team. And look at the spot that Phoenix is in. They just came off that win 2 nights ago at Denver, where they almost totally blew the lead and almost totally imploded. Went into overtime. They still wound up winning. Massive, massive win. Huge, dramatic win against Denver. Now they're coming back out of elevation, coming back home to Phoenix. They got the lowly Toronto Raptors. And who do they have up next? Oh, the Boston Celtics. And then they have Cleveland and then Boston again. So they have 3 bigger opponents up on deck. This is a monster sandwich spot. Coming off just this insane game against Denver. And then with the Boston Celtics, my Celtics up next. Yeah, not looking good for this being a focus spot for the Suns at all. So I'm going to grab the 10.5 or whatever it is right now with Toronto. I think it's gone up from an opener of like 9.5 up to 10.5. I don't really care. I mean, I don't really see the percentages on this yet, but the public, I think, is going to have to be on Phoenix. I mean, look at what Phoenix has been doing. The public is not going to come in and play the Toronto Raptors here. If anything, they might want to stay away from it. And I like the spot that the Raptors are in because they're starting a road trip. And usually starting a road trip tends to be a focused spot, especially when you're playing a good opponent like the Suns. This is a good spot because Toronto just lost their last home game. They had a bad homestand, really, where they lost 3 out of 4, but they lost to Dallas, Golden State, and the Pelicans. So 3 pretty good teams there. Those are losses that you can't really blame Toronto that much for, even though, yeah, maybe they should be a little bit better at home. But they lost to 3 good teams there, and they beat the Charlotte Hornets in there, whatever. Not really impressive, but that final home game, so they had a bad homestand, losing 3 of 4. The final game, they lost to the New Orleans Pelicans by 41 points and gave up 139. So who in their right mind is going to want to play on the Raptors here? I'm not in my right mind, as I keep saying, but I want to grab the points of the Raptors here because they're going to be in a bounce back spot. So they just got absolutely embarrassed on their own floor, losing by 41 at home, giving up that many points. You're going to want to bounce back from that, man. You got pride. No team wants that to happen to them on their own floor, even if it is against a pretty good Pelicans team. That's totally embarrassing. Giving up almost 140 and losing by 41, that's not going to stand. So they're going out on the road here, so they get to leave that bad homestand behind them. They get to just focus on basketball. They get to go far away from home here. They get to start the road trip. Starting the road trip is usually a pretty good focus spot because you want to get the road trip started in the right way. So you usually do focus on that first game, especially if it's against a pretty good opponent. But I think that focus is going to be even more in this game just because that loss that they're coming off of was so embarrassing. And now they get to, like I said, leave all those home distractions aside, get out of there, go play this game against the Phoenix Suns. And I think that's it. That's the handicap, man. So I like that one a lot, actually. That spot, that is a good spot. And it does look like, I see some percentages now where this is looking like the Suns have 94% of tickets and 94% of tickets and 84% of the cash. So they're going to have the public amount of tickets on them. It's just where is the cash discrepancy going to go against Phoenix? I mean, it looks like it might because some guys might be thinking the same way I am. So we're going to grab the Toronto Raptors. So we got 2 underdogs here. That's the entire card today, man. College basketball, we're avoiding what I think is like a pretty unreadable minefield today, even though I will probably get involved in some of these conference tournaments, especially some of the bigger conference tournaments. Those set up some better spots where you can jump in. So eventually I think we'll have some of those. But for now, we got regular season college basketball. We are taking UC Davis in that bounce back spot, +6. Or I don't know why my camera just completely becomes unfocused sometimes here like that. I don't know what's up with that because I know you want to see my adorable face here. UC Davis is going to be the play in college basketball against the UC San Diego team, who I think really has reasons to kind of be disinterested in this game. A weird, unique spot. Even though we could have gotten the 7 or 7.5 a little while ago, I still think it's fine at 6.5. I think UC San Diego, disinterested team. I mean, they are in a spot where the ineligibility might cause them to be uninterested, and it is not their final home game yet. So we're taking the points with UC Davis, and of course they totally embarrassed UC Davis on their own floor earlier this season. So UC Davis in the road revenge spot also fits some of the criteria there. So I like that spot. So UC Davis +6.5 or whatever. And then in the NBA, all the stuff I just mentioned, the Suns are in a massive sandwich spot. And I think the Raptors are in a nice bounce back spot after a real embarrassing loss and getting to go out on the road and leave those bad home games behind them. So Toronto Raptors +10.5. That's it, man. Let's get back on the winning side tonight. Let's go 2-0 for once. Peace.